this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Draft day is one of my favorite days of the year. And now that American Express is the official payments partner of the NFL, I know I can enjoy it on a whole new level. Card members can feel closer to the action at the 2026 NFL Draft by visiting the Amex Fan Experience, where they can test their skills and earn a personalized fan profile. Now that's membership at its best.
Capacity limitations and terms apply. Learn more about Amex's partnership with the NFL at go.amex/NFL.
NFL Draft is where hard work pays off and where the real work begins. Head to Lowe's.com/NFL to stock up on everything you need to build your winning roster for the upcoming season. Like Craftsman Outdoor Power Equipment, Scott's Mulch and Soil, and so much more. It's never too early to earn your Sunday with Lowe's.
Addison Hayes is a video manager and content creator at Dynasty League Football and 4for4 Football. He's also the creator of the Marker System, a model that helps forecast incoming rookies. He's a dad, he's a Nittany Lion, and he claims that stats don't lie. People do. These are his late-round perspectives.
Told my wife I wanted two things done before the draft. It was this update to my studio and our kitchen remodel, and one of those things got done. So
I thought you were gonna say like a player like Katron Allen to a specific team or something like that. You know, you got your Penn State boy going somewhere specific.
I don't know what that specific landing spot would be. Minnesota, Seattle. I mean, I would love him as the ultimate heir apparent to Baltimore. Would be fun. But yeah, that could be fun too. I'm in on that. Yeah. We learned. So I was on your show, on Addison's show, for those of you who missed it, on the DLF channel last week, or published I think on Sunday, yes, right? So it was like 4 days ago or so. This will be out the morning of the draft, the start of the draft. So we'll be able to talk the draft. You guys will be able to see how wrong we were hours later after finishing this, essentially. But no, we're doing a little home and home. So welcome to Perspectives, man. I'm glad to have you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think it's truly an honor to be on this show. And I've been listening to the Late Round podcast for years and years. I remember that during COVID, I was working at like a packing facility, moving boxes and stuff, and they let us listen to podcasts. And this was, I subscribe to so many podcasts, man. It'd be unbelievable how many you can get through in a 40-hour week. But this was on weekly rotation back then, and it still is leading up to today. So
thanks, man. I really appreciate that. It means a lot, for real. But yeah, I mean, like we had a really good discussion on your show. Most of the stuff we'll talk that's new on today's, but there's going to be a little bit of overlap because I think the discussion that we had was interesting, and you know, we can carry it over for sure. But before we get into all that, I like to do with newer prospective guests who haven't been on the show before. I think we've only had like 8 or 9 returning guests at this point, but regardless, like, talk to everybody about who you are, what you're doing, how you got into this crazy fantasy football business.
Sure. Yes. So I currently work for DLF, which was bought out a couple of years ago by our umbrella company, BetSperts. So they massively influxed, cash and resources into our site and other sites like 4for4.com as our sister site, and a few others, Bleacher Nation that covers, Chicago sports, and they have a golf thing and all that kind of stuff. So whenever they got bought out, not too long after, I was given the offer to go full time, which has been a phenomenal experience. I think I'm heading into year 4 of being full time in the fantasy industry, which is an absolute dream job. I've been working for DLF since 2019 after building out my own fantasy football website called FF Statistics. The true OGs out there would remember it. But I had that site for a little bit, and then DLF bought it, and I've been working with DLF, got into YouTube around 2020, then fully went into it. I remember the first video I specifically made that fully launched me into being more like full into YouTube was the Carson Wentz trade from Philly to Indy. It's a weird video to get into, but that was it. And then ever since, I haven't really looked back on YouTube content. So it's all analytics. I have a background in statistics from Penn State, so I'm very analytics and data driven as well. And I think, I've been in the industry for like 10 years and full time for about three or four of them. So it's been really, really fun.
And great people over at DLF. Ryan McDowell and I go way, way back. Like we've just been kind of doing stuff in the fantasy space for a while together. You know, I've got to know him through the years and such, but DLF's a great spot to be. But you mentioned that you have the statistics background. And what I think is really cool about what we're going to do and talk about today is that you have your process. Because I think this is really important because we see like with prospect evaluation, for whatever reason, it feels like it's okay for people who analyze film heavily to have differing views because it's more intuitive for someone to understand that, you know, someone is viewing Jordan Tyson this way and someone's viewing Jordan Tyson this way. Oh, we just see it a little bit differently. But for some reason, I found that people kind of expect analytical analysis to just be the same, right? But there's so many different ways that we can approach this stuff. And I have the ZAP model. That's kind of my foundation for prospecting, but you have a different system. You have the marker system. So can you talk about that, what it entails and how you kind of came up with it?
Sure. Yeah. So my go-to kind of phrase for it that the DLF fans will know loud and clear is that it is a series of check boxes or baselines based on previously successful NFL players, what they had coming out of college. So I pulled a sample of a boatload of players, filtered it down to who I deem to be successful, which varies by position, but generally it's, you know, having I think multiple top 24 seasons for running back, wide receiver, top 12 for quarterback and tight end. And so from there, I was like, what is the quartiles for all this? The first, second, third quartile for a lot of these different numbers, kind of ran it to see which ones might have been more meaningful than some of the others. And it basically just came out to, did you hit this checkbox or not? I wanted it to be pretty simple. A lot of people, sure, they have like the models and the multilinear regressions and all of that kind of stuff and blah, 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 blah. I wanted it to be simpler and very easy to explain, but then also easy to understand from the viewer standpoint who maybe doesn't have an analytical background. And I'm just saying that, from at the wide receiver position, these are kind of the baselines that a lot of successful NFL players had coming out of college at these different stats or metrics. And this prospect now, if you put him up against those same baselines, does he check those boxes or not? And it's kind of in my way of comparing it, it's kind of like hitting on a parlay. Like obviously, like if you're a sports bettor, the more legs you add to the parlay, the harder it is for that to actually happen. And so the more metrics that I have in here, the harder it is for players to hit on all of them. But the ones that do hit, right, or hit very highly, end up doing are graded out really, really well. And that kind of adds to the separation at each of the positions in terms of this player's a really good prospect, this player's a not so good prospect. So that's where all this kind of came from. I started building it out in 2021. That was the running back and the wide receiver positions, iterated it over the course of the next few years. And then last year I added the quarterback and the tight end position. So now I have a full suite for all four that I trust very well. And I've built up a nice little Discord following of people that seem to trust it as well. So it's doing pretty well. And I enjoy talking about it and enjoy, breaking everything down analytically. So for each position, are there the same number of markers or does it differ? Mm-hmm. And how many are we talking here when it comes to like just the sheer number? It does differ. So the main concept of it is that there's kind of like three buckets. So there's the production metrics, which are generally a combination of career and best season metrics. Mm-hmm. There's athleticism. So the combine in my marker system, it does kind of matter, but I'm just looking for baselines of athleticism, like a 4.55 40-yard dash, which is like sure, a 100 speed score. You have to hit certain size thresholds as well for each of the position. And then draft capital is the final and, of course, most important bucket as well. You get an additional checkbox if you're a first or second round pick. I think I stretched it out to third rounder for tight end because I found that it was pretty flat for the hit rate for just day two as opposed to the other positions. Quarterback is only first round. It's actually top 12. It's not even the full entire first round. Then there's a draft capital adjustments at the end of that kind of all feed into the final grade. And that is in essence, what we're looking for. Quarterback, it's 17 markers. Running back is 12. Wide receiver and tight end are 14. They're essentially the same, just with tight end being at a lower scale for, they're not getting the massive production that wide receivers do in college. So those are the markers for the 12 or 4 positions.
You couldn't really find, in my opinion, two kind of different ways to approach things when you look at what the ZAP model is doing versus because the ZAP model is just very formulaic, and it's driven by a handful of numbers that are trying to, project the first 3-year output for these players. And it's not necessarily approaching it from the standpoint of like, here's this sample of guys, because this is the architecture of yours, where you're looking at, here's this sample of players who have been really successful. Mine's looking at, here are all the players that have gone to the combine or who were drafted since 2011. Where does yours go back to, like, what year?
I have it going back to, it's not like a one specific one, but it's like 2003 to 2004, somewhere in there. Right. From my new tool website that I just built out, that only goes back to 2010 to like visualize the data, but I have data going back to the early to mid 2000s. Do
you find that from a modeling standpoint, a lot of like overfitting issues that you've seen with like other models out there, like how people kind of view things based on the fact that, some of it is just like availability of certain data, right? And so people are looking back to say 2019, 2018, and then like is part of the reason why you're going back so far is it to get that larger sample to make sure that you're not, overfitting to Puka Nacua, let's say.
Yeah. I did have a nice availability of that data. Obviously, being able to have data that goes back that far is, I think, kind of impressive, because it doesn't seem like a lot of other people. Yeah. It's definitely not easy. I spent a lot of time on it for sure. But I do think that it kind of, in a way, like you said, like it combats the overfitting. And like, I think there's benefits in only looking at a sample size from the last, however many years, single digit years or everything like that. But I also think that there's a lot of issues in there that, you don't get the full look of kind of the history of the NFL. And I've had people ask me before, should I be kind of changing my marker baselines for the direction that the NFL is heading into? Because one of them, I know one of the ones that kind of gets a little bit of drawback is a 30 BMI for running backs, which, that it's kind of like the Jahmyr Gibbs thing. I think I've heard you even talk about it too before. It's like Jahmyr Gibbs weighed in at 199 pounds. And I do have a marker that for running backs, you have to be 200 pounds. And so he did not check that box. Did I care at all in my actual analysis of it? Absolutely not. He graded out as by far the second best running back in that class behind Bijan Robinson, and is phenomenal in my marker system. He just happened to be 199 pounds instead of 200. But I don't want to shift too far looking at recent data and saying, well, some of these smaller wide receivers are being more successful. Some of these smaller running backs are being more successful, or some of these players that are 4-year players because of NIL, when previously being a 4-year player, 5th-year player was kind of a death nail sentence, especially at the wide receiver position. And the early declare was so much more important. I don't want to try to change my markers to get to where we're at with the NFL today, because over the past 10, 15 years, and even still today, like, it is so important to have a very high level of success at college, be a prototypically sized player. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. So a smaller sample, I think, is only penalizing you in terms of what you should actually be looking at versus, where I'm going back 20 years or more for my sample size.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like I've gotten a lot of the feedback of, well, what about NIL? And you have early declare as part of that does get signal, and that's still part of the model. But like in the end, age adjusted production is still important, even if players are playing later in the NFL. You can make the argument maybe that if there are fewer players that are declaring early, that means that there's tougher competition staying in college. But realistically, though, when you're talking early declares, even when early declaring was happening pretty frequently, we're talking like 10 to 15 players, wide receivers in a given class. That's 10 to 15 wide receivers across the collegiate landscape that's staying in school and actually it'd be more like 10 because there's usually like 5 or so early declares in these classes, right? So you're really only talking about like 10 wide receivers, like a 10 wide receiver delta from 10 years ago to today, right? In terms of how many players are declaring early. And if you're going to make the competition argument and say, well, this guy stayed in, more players are staying in college, so therefore this guy's competition looks a little bit different. I mean, I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Like in the end, good age adjusted production usually is going to win out. And then there's going to always be edge cases where players are playing with really good competition and you got to kind of sift through that and figure that out and, understand how to weigh that or how not to weigh that. But, it's hard for me to sit here and say like, oh, NIL is happening, therefore, Bryce Lance, who I feel like I've been crapping on this show, and I'm not even meaning to necessarily because I understand the upside case, but like the dude had 1 catch across his first 3 years of his college career, right? Like you can't, it's really hard to argue that Bryce Lance's age-adjusted production is phenomenal, right? Like it's a really hard argument to make. And we know historically that bad age-adjusted production, even last year, the year before, in recent memory, is not good for a prospect. That part at least is not going to change. It is a difficult thing to balance though overall, where like there's a changing NFL, things always kind of ebb and flow and there's differences and such. But even like the small running back problem that has arisen, or the way that people are viewing them, you have Devon Achane, you have James Cook, you have Keaton Mitchell to a degree, who's gotten more run than a player like that, maybe historically. But again, you're still working with a pretty small sample size. Kyron Williams, you could throw out there. You're still working with a pretty small sample size. And I say this in the guide every year because running back weight, I don't have a threshold the way that you do, but like it is an input in the model. Like the bigger a running back is up until a point, like I don't care if he's 250 pounds or something like that. But, if he's like, I think it goes up to like 220 or 225. They get benefited from that, but it's in conjunction with all the other stuff that's going on, right? Just like the marker system, it's in conjunction with all these other production inputs. So if Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't hit that mark, doesn't mean that he's bad. It's just one of the inputs of many that you're really looking at, and it just seems like it just goes overstated a lot of times, this kind of stuff in the analytical discussion. It's like, we're just trying to directionally get to the right place.
Right. We're trying to, I always call it, like when you're, one of the hardest parts of playing golf that I enjoy playing golf. This t-shirt's actually a golf t-shirt, funny enough, but, one of the best ways that people tell you to get better at golf is to find ways to hit the green, like inside 100 or 150 yards with just like a wedge shot, I feel like that's what we try to do analytically is like, can we just land on the green and then try to 2-putt our way into, getting good scores and hitting on some of these players. I think in a lot of way, what my marker system does really well is, it can tell you some of the players that like you should take, but most of the time it's just going to tell you like Malik Neighbors graded out as the wide receiver 1. You should have drafted Malik Neighbors. Yeah. For those of you out there who didn't know, you should have drafted Malik Neighbors. You should have drafted Bijan Robinson. There's a bunch of those players that you should just draft. You should draft Jeremiah Love this year at the 101.
Yeah. Shocker.
But I think with my marker system, shocker. I think what my marker system does really well though is tell you some of the players that you shouldn't take. Yeah. And I think by crossing off some of the players on your list in, the top 12 or top 24 of your rookie drafts, then that should hopefully point you in the direction of some other players. So like, I don't have a vast opinion on a lot of guys that are just kind of in that mid round range for rookie drafts. Just because I think that they're all kind of similar and maybe landing spot and draft capital is going to give us a little bit more insight into that. But if I could tell you some of the players that I don't like in those ranges. Yeah. And if you avoid those players and that points you towards somebody else, Matthew Golden was a perfect example of that last year. I did not want Matthew Golden. So if you just cross Golden off your list, put you over towards a Tyler Warren, a Colston Loveland, a Luther Burden, somebody like that, that would have been of way better usage of your rookie pick. And I think that is what we try to do analytically, is just try to get you into that neighborhood. And ideally, we steer you in the right direction more often than not.
Yeah, it's a great way to view it and to think about it. Let's talk about some of these players. Both of these models really like Jordan Tyson. I know that from talking to you last week. What are some of the things that the marker system's seeing with Tyson?
Yeah, so Tyson, he has a projected final grade of an 85 out of 100 on a 100 point scale, which is pretty incredible. I actually just recorded a video for the DLF YouTube channel talking through some of my misses over the past few years since 2017. So through 2017 to 2023, if you're looking at players that had an 85 or above final grade, there are, I didn't have the exact number, but it was like 20 to 30 players in that sample size. And only 5 of them failed to have a top 12 season at their position. Now for quarterbacks and tight ends, you could argue whether top 12 is actually super beneficial, especially for tight ends. But the fact that like the biggest misses on there grade wise are Corey Davis, N'Keal Harry. You could argue like Cam Akers was a miss. Maybe that's an injury thing. J.K. Dobbins in a similar light. But there's a lot of other players on there that are tremendous hits throughout that sample. And I only went up to 2023 because I didn't want to, crap on Marv or Roma Dunze or anybody just yet. I want to give him a little bit more time. Yeah. Tedero McMillan doesn't have a top 12 fantasy season yet, but he's only played 1 year. So let's give him some time. So Jordan Tyson is about to enter into that range as a first round pick, potential top 15, maybe even a top 10 draft pick, tonight, I guess, if this is releasing on Thursday.
Yeah.
That he is going to enter a very elite set of players over the past decade or so. I mean, he's got the age at draft day. He's going to be 21 years old. He'll turn 22 at some point this summer, but even as a 4-year player, that's pretty impressive. Had the 20% breakout age in year 1, the 30% breakout age in year 1 as well. Yards per team pass attempt is there. He had a big fantasy points per game season of over 20. He's got the size. He didn't test, so I don't have any of the athleticism numbers for him, but I'd imagine that he would hit on the majority of my athleticism markers as well from what I have seen from him on tape. And he just misses. I'm looking for a 35% best market share yard season. He was at 34.3. So that's where, you probably would like smirk at that a little bit and just be like, that's kind of the negative of my black and white yes or no, that he was at 34.3, didn't hit 35, but it's still like when you're looking at these numbers and analyzing all of that, the fact that Jordan Tyson is an 85 maybe could have been even better if I used some sort of like sliding scale instead of a yes or no checkbox. He's by far the wide receiver 1 in this class analytically.
Yeah, I want to say this too, because I'm sure people are listening to this and they've seen me like rail against threshold type related stuff. You even brought it up whenever I went on your show, and you're like, I know you hate threshold analysis, and I don't, right? I don't hate threshold analysis when it's like this, right? Where you're looking at like it's a numbers game from a quantity game, right? You're looking at all of these different values as opposed to one single value. My problem with the threshold game is typically when people are making or not typically, when people are making or breaking the way they view a prospect based on one single metric or even 2 metrics, right? Where they're like, oh, he doesn't hit in zone yards per route run and receiving yards per team pass attempt in their best season, so therefore he can't be any good. I have issues with that because there are other things that we need to look at. Age, early declare status. Obviously a player who's only played 3 years in college is at a disadvantage for career statistics because, it's similar like Casey Concepcion. If he were to come back to school, how do we know he wouldn't dominate in year 4? That's why we can adjust for age and look at different breakout related metrics. So I do want to throw that out there that like, as people are listening to this isn't like an awkward thing between me and Addison. Like number 1, we had the discussion, but number 2, like I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this stuff. And my threshold beef is more so, I mean, let's just be real. It's like Twitter bro stuff. It's just like cause I'm guilty of it at times too. But I'm not fading or targeting players strictly because of that thing. I'm doing it to just like get something out there to see how people react and get a conversation going, about a certain player. Right. But the Jordan Tyson stuff is really, to me, I said it all off season. I feel like a broken record. But I am kind of surprised the way that like Keep Trade Cut or even DraftKings Best Ball, I've been doing a lot of early Best Ball drafts and such. Like there's a like not significant, but there's a decent gap between Tate and Lemon. It might not be as much after the steam that Tyson's gotten over the last week, but there's been a decent gap between Tate and Lemon to Jordan Tyson. And to me, analytically, this is the 101 profile. Not wide receiver, not with Jeremiah Love, but this is the best production profile, in my opinion, in the class. I have this in the prospect guide, but if Tyson does get top 20 capital, which seems very likely at this point, he has a breakout score of 95.1, which is a 99th percentile breakout score because he dominated in receiving yards per team pass attempt prorated as a freshman, like just age adjusted, because he was a young freshman too, which is really like you said, he's 21 and he's a 4-year college player, which does not happen super frequently. So he's entering college at a young age. He dominates at Colorado, leading that team in receiving. So he kind of starts his breakout score journey. It's triggered and it's pretty good to start. And then he has that third season, which was just out of control from a prorated perspective. But top 20 capital with breakout scores 90 and above since 2011, which is when the ZAP model goes back to. Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins. Okay. That's probably an L. I mean, he was still semi-productive, he had
that one season in Buffalo, man.
Right. Where we were ready for something good to happen there. Amari Cooper, which is a comp that people have used for Jordan Tyson, which I think if Jordan Tyson has an Amari Cooper fantasy trajectory, a career, we'd be fine with, right? Like
I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Corey Davis, who I think is the scary downside case for Jordan Tyson. But then there's CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Malik Neighbors. Like, it's just hit after hit after hit with, wide receiver is different from running back, where running back, Jeremiah Love's going to almost definitely be a hit just because of the way that the position kind of is structured and how coaches can choose to feed guys. And that's what really drives fantasy football. It's really hard to find a hit rate with buckets like a bucket like that that's that much better. It's a really, really good situation for Tyson to be in analytically. So I'm with you. Jordan Tyson, wide receiver 1. Let's just cross our fingers that this landing spot doesn't suck. Please.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that he goes to the Giants. I'm in with him on the Giants. I think it would operate well with Neighbors on the X and then put Tyson in that kind of Wan'Dale role, but he's a better Wan'Dale Robinson. So I think that would be incredible for him. I'll take Kansas City. I'll take New Orleans. Yeah. I'll take Washington. I don't really think outside of Cleveland that there's I'll even take Miami for him. Honestly. Cleveland
would suck. I mean, Tennessee is still a possibility, which would be kind of interesting just because there's not much in his way, in terms of just and what if Cam Ward is better than what most people expect? I mean, there's just that possibility at least. I guess I'm really just Cleveland would scare the crap out of me. I think Miami is still scary too, even though there's no wide receivers there. He could get fed, but it's still I'm thinking long term too. And I don't know. Malik Willis is a very, very big question mark right now, but
he is. Yeah. It reminds me of Jalen Waddle's rookie year though, where he just kind of got fed by Tua. I think he was a fantasy wide receiver 1 that year.
Yeah.
I've heard Harmon say that, if Tyson or Lemon or whoever goes to Miami could have sort of a Drake London start to his year, a Garrett Wilson start to his career, where it's just kind of he's in that 900 to 1,000 yard range, which is good, but is it actually good? And then it takes a few years for the team actually gets better for him to catch up.
The good news, though, is that when I've found, at least when wide receivers have this kind of draft capital associated with them, it seems like the dynasty market is going to be more forgiving. I mean, they've been forgiving with Rome Odunze. I honestly think, I guess Odunze had a good start to last year, but it is a little bit surprising to me that he still has not to say that's right or wrong. It's just surprising to me that he has the value in the dynasty market still, where he is, just because I feel like traditionally maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, after 2 years of, year 1, very iffy production and per route run efficiency, last year was definitely better. And we're seeing the ecosystem he's in, which is, I think is doing a lot of the work to keep him afloat. But regardless, feels like dynasty managers used to just be no, I'm done. I don't want this anymore. But the fact that he had that top 10 capital, I think will at least give these guys an extra year almost, so if Tyson does get that, which it sounds like it's trending in that direction, I think that also helps his dynasty value overall too.
Yeah. I kind of feel that way about Marv though too. Marv.
Yeah.
I think Odunze's situation looks better.
Marv is probably the better example.
Yeah. But Marv was labeled as one of the best wide receiver prospects of all time. So I'm wondering how much of leeway is he still getting for that. But these wide receivers have a lot of insulated value for sure. I mean, I think that's going to be a positive for all 3 of these guys, because it seems like Carnell Tate's going to be a top 10 pick. Lemon, I don't know if he's top 10. He might get there, but I mean, he's probably a top 15 pick, top 12. And I think all 3 of these guys are going to have really, really good insulated value. It's kind of a similar argument for Mendoza, even if he doesn't start right away or has a little bit of tougher translation because, we don't really view him as like the greatest quarterback prospect coming out. He's got this Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff kind of aura about him. But still, as like the first overall pick in the NFL draft, he's going to have insulated value. I think any pick in the top 5 for rookie drafts this year seems pretty safe. It's just, can you maximize for that early ceiling? Yeah,
like you'll have an off ramp. I think after year one, if you're like, I really don't know if this dude is it. Like I think that we had the off ramp for I had the infamous Rome Odunze trade that I did last year. I got blasted for where I gave up Odunze for like the 108 because I figured the 108 at worst was going to be a Emeka Egbuka. And I thought this was like a re-roll situation from Odunze to Egbuka where we already saw what we got with Odunze. And, I don't want to make too many excuses for players. And so, I went that route. And yes, I'm happy that trade that went.
I would be.
Yeah. But I do think that like, that's the beauty of investing in these positions like this is that, and why we should worry about draft capital is because of consensus. And if the market is worrying about draft capital, we have that insulated value, like you said, that you will have an opportunity to get off unless it's just a complete disaster, which I don't think these wide receivers necessarily show that, but it's a good transition to Carnell Tate because I've had Matt Harmon on, I've had Matt Waldman on. Both of them are very high, not very high, but they like Carnell Tate as the wide receiver 1 in this class. It seems like a lot of people like Carnell Tate as the wide receiver 1 in this class. But we had a discussion on your show and you have some red flags in the marker system with Carnell Tate. So talk about it. I'm really interested to hear this.
Yeah. So Carnell Tate grades out currently, projected grades, but he's going to be somewhere in the 60s. And that, for reference, I mentioned Jordan Tyson's going to be 85. Mekhi Lemon's probably going to be in the, low to mid 70s, based on some of his earlier adjusted production and stuff. And then Carnell Tate's down in the 60s. Now, I feel like most people from a dynasty standpoint, now obviously I want to say this, he is my wide receiver 3. So he is my wide receiver 3 subjectively. I'm a Penn State fan. I watched him torch my Nittany Lions. I'm in that Big Ten area as well. So I understand what Carnell Tate can do film wise. I've listened to Harmon. I've listened to Wallman. I've listened to so many different people who have him as their wide receiver 1 from the film. The numbers scare me though, because in the 60s, that means he's not all that different than, KC and Boston and Omar Cooper. He's not in the quote unquote big 3. It'd be Tyson, then Lemon, and then kind of like the second group of 4 guys with Tate included, if you're going off of my marker system. The thing that scares me a little bit is that we have sort of applied this Ohio State aura to any of these first round wide receivers. I mean, it's a pretty good track record. You've got Olave, Wilson, JSN, Marv, Egbuka. Now we've got Carnell Tate. We're going to have Jeremiah Smith coming out. I heard about this other kid that they got as a freshman. I think his name's Chris Henry Jr. Yeah. He's going to be like the 2029 or 2030 wide receiver 1, I'm sure. And he's just going to destroy Penn State every single time that he gets a chance to. But they've got a tremendous track record for this. And I think that we are overlooking a lot of the issues with Carnell Tate's production profile because he's been playing with some of these other really good wide receivers and that's worked for the other guys. And so it should just work for Carnell Tate. But when you compare him and just put his numbers up with all the other guys, it's 6 total players: Olave, Wilson, Jason, Marv, Egbuka, Tate. All of them have a 20% breakout age. But the other 5 did it in year 2. Carnell Tate did it in year 3. And again, they're all playing with each other as well. So Tate's playing with arguably the best wide receiver out of Ohio State, but all of those other guys played in and amongst themselves throughout various years. So Carnell Tate took 1 extra year to have that 20% dominator rating threshold. You look at a best season's yard per team pass attempt, raw yards per team pass attempt. 4 of the 5 other guys had over 3 yards per team pass attempt. Egbuka did not. He was at 2.8. Carnell Tate is at 2.14. Market share of yards, all of the other 4 guys had over 32% of market share. Egbuka was at 29.7. Carnell Tate is at 23.3. You look at raw receiving yards per game. All of them are over 57. Carnell Tate is sub 50. Best season of fantasy points per game. The main 4 are over 23. Egbuka is at almost 21. Carnell Tate is at 17.6. Then you also look, I have another series of markers that are the advanced markers for yards per route run, targets per route run, first downs per route run, contested catches, all of that kind of stuff. This to me is my way of seeing, does your per route production match your career or seasonal production? And I've found a lot of success in comparing those two numbers. And if there's any mismatches in any one way or another, that could signal either good or bad things. The other 5 Ohio State wide receivers, out of 17 advanced markers that I have for wide receivers, all of them were in the double digits. Garrett Wilson was at a 10, JSN was at 15, Abuka was at 12 last year. Carnell Tate's at 5. Ooh. So that's also pointing me to this. He doesn't have the career or seasonal production that the other guys had. He doesn't have the per route production and success that the other guys had. He's the only one of the group that had under 2.6 career yards per route run, under 2.5 yards per route run versus zone, under 25% targets per route run, under 12% first downs per route run. He's sub 5 yards after the catch per reception. He's also relatively high overall in terms of the number of targets that he saw that were contested, which could kind of insinuate maybe separation issues or that vertical route tree that Harmon talks about a lot for him. As an ex-receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. also kind of had that, and we've seen one of the main reasons that people point to as to why Marv hasn't necessarily translated yet is perhaps some of this lack of separational issues that he thrived on at Ohio State because he's tremendous, but when you get to the NFL, that doesn't necessarily slide as well. So Carnell Tate kind of has that similar issue as maybe Marv had collegiately in terms of contested catches and target share of contested catches. So there's just a lot of stuff in here that scares me about Carnell Tate's profile analytically. Of course, the film's going to look way better if you're just watching the film and everything like that. And you can make the excuse of, well, he's opposite of Jeremiah Smith. You're going to throw to Jeremiah Smith more so than Carnell Tate. And he's not going to play with a Jeremiah Smith in the NFL, supposedly. He might be the wide receiver 1 for his team. But I'm wondering if he's just not going to translate as well as Lemon or Tyson or, compared to the other Ohio State wide receivers that came before him because he doesn't have all of these analytical thresholds.
I think so. The way that the ZAP model views things, first off, that was a great breakdown. But the way the ZAP model views things is in agreement that he is the worst Ohio State wide receiver to come out over the last 5 years or what have you, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, the pushback is, well, those guys are all really good. So if he's the worst, he can still be good. But I think what's interesting, what you're saying is that it's not close, right? It seems like, am I interpreting that wrong? You're saying,
no.
From what the marker system is saying is that it's really not a close discussion between even Abuka, who I think would be the consensus, lower than the rest, which I think he's the lowest in mine as well, even though the model liked him a decent bit. He's still a decent bit lower than Abuka. And that's pretty scary overall. I mean, does this point to also the idea that what I've kind of thrown around, this idea that he could just be better in real football than in fantasy football? Because he wasn't a target getter. And I understand, going to what you said about Jeremiah Smith, I get all that. I think part of the problem in this discussion, not the one that you're having, but the way that the masses have it with this, is that we say, oh, there's competition, therefore we can kind of wipe out any red flags or question marks we could have about this profile. Similar to Jadarian Price, right? Where it's like, oh, he played with Jeremiah Love, therefore his production profile doesn't actually matter. It's like, okay, let's start here. Let's say, yes, there's competition problems for him. Obviously Jeremiah Smith is elite. And I've actually found that teammate score matters at wide receiver. So sure, I get the argument for that, but how far do you take that is the question, right? And I think it's a hard thing for anyone to answer. It's certainly a hard thing for someone who's going to be more quantitative to answer, to directly answer. But do you think that that's certainly playing a role in how people are kind of dismissing some of this stuff with Carnell Tate?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Ohio State track record. It's, we know how great Jeremiah Smith is. I mean, you just look at his stat lines from the past 2 years. It's absolutely insane.
It's crazy. I mean, he's going to break our models for the record.
He really is. It's incredible. So there is, I think, just a lot of excuses being made for Carnell Tate because of what the other Ohio State players have done. and the competition that he also played with Ibuka as well. So, right. He was, for some of his career, he was the wide receiver 3 on his own team.
Yeah.
So you can kind of make a little bit of an excuse, but the fact that even last year when he has a Heisman candidate quarterback in Julian Sayin, and he is the wide receiver 2 behind Jeremiah Smith, that he's still not even getting close to some of the other thresholds that Ibuka had across from Marv, that JSN had with Marv, or, behind Olave and Garrett Wilson as well. That's really scary to me. I do agree with you. I think that he could fit more in the bucket of better for real life than for fantasy, as kind of like, I've kind of used Quentin Johnston's role on the Chargers the past couple of years as kind of an example of just like, he's this X guy. He can make some really good catches. He can have some massive games, but, depending on the situation and the quarterback play that he also gets teamed up with, it could be really impactful on what he actually is able to produce from a fantasy football standpoint. And if you're just saying that, he's the wide receiver 1 in this class because his film looks so great, but the production may not follow, that's not going to be worth the 102, the 103 in Dynasty rookie drafts, because I think it might be, a really slow start for him. If he's in the 800 to 900 yard range at best with maybe 5, 6, 7 touchdowns, that's not going to cut it for fantasy production at all.
Post draft, do you think that, because I'll just be honest, I think post draft I'll probably have Mekhi Lemon and Carnell Tate, depending on draft capital, so don't hold me to it, probably in the same tier. But are you looking at this and you're saying you will probably have Lemon a tier ahead of Carnell Tate?
I go back and forth on it. The draft capital is going to be so high for Carnell Tate that it's going to be hard for me to take him out of that discussion. Yep. And I also I've kind of been wanting him to be the Cleveland Browns pick at 6. So
it would make our lives way easier. Yeah.
I could just wash my hands of it. I don't like Carnell Tate as a prospect as much as other people. And then he goes to Cleveland. I don't even got to worry about it. But if he went to Washington or New Orleans or Kansas City or anything like that, and now I can talk myself into the landing spot in the situation, I'm going to be more scared of that personally. But I think it's going to be a lot harder to move him out of that kind of second tier. If you got Jeremiah Love as a tier of his own, then you've got the other 3 wide receivers and then Mendoza in Superflex leagues. Yep. That feels like the consensus tier 1, tier 2. Yep. And I'm still there right now. I'm probably still going to be there post draft as well, unless if he is the Cleveland Browns pick at 6, that might be really what kicks him down.
Yeah. And then I think there is a scenario where I'll have Jordan Tyson in his own tier. There's at least an outcome here where he goes really early and then Tate goes to Cleveland and there is a gap in their Zap score. So I can at least make the quantitative case for it. And then teams look at Mekhi Lemon. They're like, oh, I don't really want Lemon because I think he's just going to be a slot and I don't want to invest in that. And then he drops a little bit in the draft further than what we think. That, if those things happen.
The Jets at 16 for Lemon.
Right. So if those kinds of things happen, I can see things being jumbled a little bit from a tier perspective. My stuff likes Tate a little bit more than yours. But I do think that it's really important for people to hear kind of the bear case, because feels like all my guests have been giving the bull case for Carnell Tate. And it's good to hear the other side of things for sure. You talked about that next kind of group of Casey Concepcion, Omar Cooper, Denzel Boston. They're kind of being grouped at, being back half of the first round draft capital. I think there's at least a chance that Denzel Boston doesn't even go in round 1. It seems like there's that's at least a possibility. Do you have any favorites among that group, and what are some of the red flags for these guys?
Yeah, so this is actually my order for them as well. It's Casey, then Omar Cooper, then Denzel Boston, at 4, 5, and 6 for me pre-draft. Casey definitely grades out the best of them. He's at 66, whereas Boston would be a 61, and then Omar Cooper would be a 60, 61. So they're all right there with Carnell Tate, but that's at least the final grade order based on they're all being projected first round picks. So like you said, if Boston were to fall out of the first round, he would drop. If Cooper were to fall out of the first round, he would drop. I think KC feels locked into the first round. Yeah. So I don't think that's really a discussion there. I do gravitate towards KC just because, I've continued to listen to Matt Harmon, and he's talking about how he loves him so much and that he's ahead of Jordan Tyson for him. And there are production excuses for him at Texas A&M because the quarterback play was really rough. Mm-hmm. And he had that early production as well in college.
Yep.
That I can at least point to that versus, Boston, you can make the excuse he played with Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. Right. So the first couple of years were rough as a wide receiver 4. Omar Cooper didn't have the early production as well. So if I was just looking at, straight which one of these guys produced and at the earliest, that would be KC as well. So I lean more towards him. I think he would qualify as my favorite of this group. Mm-hmm. And I think the draft capital is going to be the highest for him as well. It's going to be really interesting to see where he ultimately lands. I've seen so many different landing spots for him as a potential top 15 pick, as a mid-20s pick, anywhere in between. So it's going to be really, really fun to see where he ends up landing. In terms of red flags, we kind of discussed this last week on my video, but it is that career yards per route run versus zone. It's just such an interesting stat. And if you were to just look at any one stat and just say, I'm avoiding players that fall into this category, a sub 2.25 career yards per route run versus zone in the first 2 rounds. I mean, we're talking over the past 6 or 7 draft classes: Golden, Leggett, Pearsall, Keon Coleman, Adonai Mitchell, Jalen Polk, Jonathan Mingo, Terrace Marshall, Jalen Reagor, Chase Claypool, Denzel Mims, KJ Hamler, Van Jefferson, N'Keal Harry. If you just use that one number to avoid drafting those players, you would have a pretty tremendous hit rate. And all 3 of these guys fall into that bucket. So I really hate to just use that one number as like a threshold thing. I'm wanting to look at my whole entire modeling, but I would be lying if I told you that it's just not, kind of whispering in the back of my head that this is a possibility for all these guys, that they just don't have the collegiate success versus zone through yards per route run. I know Harmon would disagree with me, I think, on some of this based on what he's charted, but the numbers are there that they don't compare very favorably with a lot of other players. So it's tough for me. I do like KC. I like Omar Cooper. Omar Cooper doesn't have that sub 2.25. KC and Boston do. So Cooper clears it. So he's solid. Yeah. But KC and Boston, I feel like I'm a little bit scared of as well, just because I don't know, like he's like this prototype of wide receiver that sometimes gets stuck on the X and that just doesn't really have fantasy production. Yeah. Like I could see I think of the 3, I think his bust potential is the highest.
Yeah, I mean, right now I have draft capital delta as a metric that I use to sort of describe what these prospects are. And it's essentially just looking at the score from a draft capital perspective. So like if they're 20th overall, they get a score based on what we've seen historically, or like a percentile-esque type score. And then, if they're 30th overall, what have you. And I just compare that to their actual ZAP score. And if it's really, really green, that means that they have a low risk draft capital delta. If it's really, really red, that means that they're high risk, because it means that the model likes them less than where they were drafted, right? The majority of players get neutral. They're just like, sure, they're being drafted where they should be. And obviously, historically, if this weren't the case, then the model would suck. But historically, low risk players have been better bets versus expectation than high risk players have. Denzel Boston, spoiler alert, there's a very real chance he's a high risk player in the ZAP model post draft. A very real chance. And maybe it's unfair because of what you said, with who he played against at Washington, early on in his career. But his numbers really are not, even his career yards per route. Like that's what I was saying earlier with like zone and man yards per route run, and how like I think that part of it also with the signal that we get with zone is that more players play against zone. And so we have a larger sample of those players playing against that type of defense. And naturally, when you have larger samples, you're going to get more direct and better correlation and predictiveness, right? Mm-hmm. So like when it comes to man, you're not getting as much. And so there's maybe a little bit more of that volatility. But even if you just look at career, Denzel Boston's is what, 2.02, I think, career yards per route run rate, something along those lines. And
yeah, I've got him at 2.0. So
yeah, right. So it's like, it's a very, I mean, that's a number that is frightening when you look at literally any wide receiver who gets drafted, but especially, in the early parts of the draft. It's just, there's a high bust potential. And at least with Casey Concepcion, I'll go back to the idea that he played 3 years in college. Like Denzel Boston had that extra year to compile those numbers, those career numbers. Casey Concepcion, at least you could adjust a little bit and say, okay, it would have been better had he stayed in school another year. With Boston, it's just different because he was there for all 4. So Boston, to me, a lot of red flags. Omar Cooper, I'm just kind of like, whatever. Like, I don't have like a strong opinion on him. And then Concepcion, I think Concepcion's pretty good. Like, I'm still intrigued by, his overall profile, and what he brings to the table, but we'll see. Hopefully he gets the draft capital to back it. All right. So there's this cluster of wide receivers that we just talked about. There's that top 6. I don't know right now what to do after the top 6. So you get like, we're looking at the NFL draft. Let's say that those 6 go in round 1 and then day 2 starts. Are there any favorites for you outside of the 6 that we just talked about?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way with you. Like, they're all just like Chris Bell, Zachariah Branch, Jeremy Bernard. Like, all these guys are just kind of like, they're there. And some of them you could, find reasons to be in on. Some of them you could find reasons to be out on. I lean more towards Elijah Surratt as kind of like my go-to guy. And honestly, if you wanted to make the case that he's the better Indiana wide receiver in this class, I would totally hear that case out. Analytically, in my marker system, he does not grade out very well. He's got a projected grade of a 39 based on 3rd round draft capital. So that could go up if he finds himself into the 2nd round. But where he stands right now is maybe a projected 3rd round pick. It's not all that great. However, if you look at his profile, he suffered, I don't know if I've ever seen this before, but from a player who he just suffers so badly from my threshold bases that I have here, because I'm looking at this. So I want 1st or 2nd round draft capital to check that box for draft capital. If he's a round 3 guy, then he just misses that. So that kind of best yards per team pass attempt, I'm looking for 2.85. He's at 2.8. Best market share of yards, I'm looking for 35%. He's at 32 and some change. Best fantasy points per game season, I'm looking for 20. He's at 19.6. Speed score, so he ran a 4.53 at his pro day. So at his weight of, what is he, 6'2", 210? Yeah. So at his weight, that 4.53, I'm looking for a 100 speed score. That grades out to a 99.7 speed score. So like, there are a handful of these thresholds that he is just so minutely close to actually getting to that if he were to actually hit on all of them, he might be, in that 60s bucket, maybe even closer to a Mekhi Lemon as well in this wide receiver class. It's so close for him between hitting or not hitting on some of those, that maybe that's where you could say some of the weakness of the marker system comes from. But that's also what is gravitating me towards him, is that his profile analytically, while not like jumping off the page, or else obviously he would have hit those markers, but it is, I think, it sticks out more than a Zachariah Branch, a Jeremy Bernard, a Chris Bell, and Antonio Williams, all of these other guys that are in this, day 2 kind of range, that I lean more towards Elijah Surratt as the kind of wide receiver 7 of this class. And like I said, if you want to say that he's the best Indiana wide receiver, I definitely think that you could make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, look, breakout score in the ZAP model, I've said it before, but with top 100 wide receivers, has basically the same kind of R-squared and predictiveness as draft capital itself. And obviously the two combined / with all the other stuff makes the ZAP model worthwhile and better than draft capital. But Elijah Surratt has a breakout score in the 73rd percentile. It's 51. And Omar Cooper's is in the 55th percentile at about 42. So he has Omar Cooper has a worse breakout score. Adjusted best season fantasy points, goes to Surratt. I mean, the yards per out run stuff generally will go to Surratt. The one thing that scares, obviously some of that stuff, like the yards per out run stuff, I'm not adjusting. I'm just because it's not part of the model. But, obviously he played at like St. Francis and then he went to James Madison. So he didn't have necessarily the same kind of competition / opponents and schedule, adjusted stuff as Omar Cooper did. But the one thing that does scare me a little bit about Elijah Surratt is that he got comped to Pat Bryant and Michael Thomas in the ZAP model, which fine. I don't think that that's like horrific, right? But those are two big slots, right? They're guys that benefited from Sean Payton moving them into the slot, or at least that's what we think is going to happen with Pat Bryant. And he started to do that last year. But Michael Thomas, obviously, that was his game. And I think we're looking at that kind of profile with Surratt potentially, because his contested target rate was 95th percentile, and then his contested catch rate was 90th percentile. So like he was a very much a Fernando Mendoza security blanket, throw it up, like hopefully he makes a play. And he made those plays, which is why I said this as a bold prediction on the Late Round Fantasy Football show today. So you guys who are listening, you probably already heard that. But Elijah Surratt going to the Raiders in round 3 is very possible, like a very realistic landing spot, which to me would be perfect because the Raiders don't really have that true contested catch guy on that team right now. And then obviously you're pairing him with his quarterback from last year in college, right? So I'm intrigued by that. I'm intrigued by Surratt because, again, I think that the market is fairly efficient right now with who the best wide receivers are. Like they're ranking them relatively well. Some years, like we'll be sitting here and we're like, man, like Luther Burden for me last year, I'm like, this is not a second round profile. I don't really understand why, like this should be more of a first round profile. But this year, I just don't get that as much. Like a lot of the day 2 projected guys, I'm like, yeah, I can see the upside case, but I also don't think that their analytical profiles are that special. But Surratt is probably the one in the ZAP model as well that at least like analytically looks decent, right? Compared to like a Zachariah Branch or whoever, or even like a Jeremy Bernard. But yeah, so it's an interesting call out. Are there any like later day 2, maybe day 3 wideouts you're interested, or is it just like, let's just see where these landing spots are?
Yeah. The one that I think sticks out to me a little bit analytically that I haven't really seen his name thrown out there a lot is actually Deion Burks out of Oklahoma. And no, I'm entirely joking.
I knew you were trolling with that. You guys can run back and look at my face when he was saying that. I'm like, he knows what he's doing here. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Harmon brought up Deion Burks. I got in a fight with Harmon on the show about him calling out Deion Burks, but then he had Jeremiah on his show, on his Yahoo show, and he brought up Deion Burks. And then Harmon, started saying, well, JJ said that Deion Burks' analytical profile isn't very good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for not trolling.
I think Alfredo likes him too. I think he responded to Harmon, put that Deion Burks clip up and was like, there's dozens of us. And then I think Alfredo responded to it as well. I don't know if he actually is or not.
When you get smart people that are in on a player that you're just like, I don't see it at all. It's a little bit scary, but I'm not that nervous about Deion Burks.
No, I'm not either. Yeah. There are some interesting kind of, fringe day 2, more likely day 3 guys. I do really like Bryce Lance. I know that it's kind of become your thing to kind of crap on him a little bit.
Apparently it's become my thing.
But I can see it's the upside case, right?
Yeah,
it's can he be the Christian Watson comp is very, very similar just because, you could look at the school. They're basically the same size, have very similar like top end production at North Dakota State, but it's also North Dakota State. So, but I think whenever you're looking at Bryce Lance versus, like, I don't really like Zachariah Branch. I don't know what to do with Chris Bell and Jeremy Bernard, and Antonio Williams gets some interest as like maybe a slot kind of Tyler Boyd kind of thing. But like, does that interest me for fantasy football? Not really. Whereas if Bryce Lance, if you're really going to swing for upside, if he lands with the Chiefs on day 2 as their kind of X receiver fix, or I think Seattle would be a really interesting landing spot. Like one of those good situations to where he could plug and play as their outside receiver. I think that would be pretty interesting. So I would take shots on Bryce Lance. And, if he's I've seen him ranked inside the top 10 for people. Mm-hmm. I've seen him ranked in the back end of the teens. Like he's all over the place. I lean more towards having him as a top 10 guy. And that's just purely out of fantasy football intrigue and upside. So I would shout Bryce Lance out. Skylar Bell has an interesting profile as well. I think he kind of became like a very early draft season analytical darling, and then I just really haven't heard his name since. He had a really good combine. The production's pretty interesting at UConn. So I think Skylar Bell's a pretty interesting guy as like that more slot only kind of person. Ted Hurst, Jeff Caldwell, I feel like those are just the go-to analytical names. I really wish Eric McAllister wasn't like a horrible human being because
some off the field stuff.
Yeah, he seems like Jermaine Burton, but maybe worse. To where like analytically he looks pretty phenomenal. He would actually be a candidate for what I have deemed the McConkey list. That is the list of players whose per route production far exceeds their seasonal or career production. And that has been like a very, very good signal a la Lab McConkey, and Puka Nacua was on that list. A few other guys. So he would need 5th round or better draft capital. I don't know if he gets that to actually be onto that list. So, but he's just a name. And then I really want to like Dejon Stribling out of Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. I really want to like him. The analytical profile isn't necessarily there. He bounced all over the place in college. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Jonathan Mingo. Yeah. If you're just kind of helmet scouting, Ole Miss as well. But I don't know. Like I've been seeing some more highlights of him. I watched a little bit of film on him as well. He just seems like he's kind of got like that dog in him. Like he's going to also be willing to block as well. He's kind of like a fun 6'2", 200-pound kind of wide receiver that's just better than a slot only guy. I really want to like him. My analytics tell me that I shouldn't really worry too much about him, but he might be an interesting, 3rd or 4th round conversation for me in rookie drafts.
Yeah, it was really like, because he's been getting some love from legit sources, like legit people and people who analyze this stuff. And then I went back and I looked, because like I think his projected capital in the pre-draft version of the guide was like 172nd overall. So, someone that while you're writing something like that in early March, I'm not going to be that interested, because realistically, like you said, his analytical profile is like 20 to 40th percentile stuff across the board, right? Like it's not that strong. And the last sentence in his pre-draft profile says, unless draft capital surprises in a meaningful way, Stribling isn't someone that you'll need to prioritize in rookie drafts. But there's a chance that draft capital surprises based on the way that people have been talking about him. So I think that's an important call out to make. All right, let's move on to the running back position. And let's not talk about Jeremiah Love. We know, right? Like he's good, draft him. Let's talk about some other guys. Your model really likes Jonah Coleman. And one of my bold predictions on the show was that he ends up being the RB2 in this class, like from a draft capital perspective. Like there's at least, I think, a chance. Not that I think that it's probable. That was a bold predictions, hot takey kind of show. But I do think there's a chance because he has a do-it-all profile. He's bigger bodied. He's safe, right? But what is the marker system seeing with Jonah Coleman to make him as your RB2?
It is seeing that he is a really, really good all-around player with, I should say, I was going to say like the size. He's 5'8", but he's 220 pounds. The dude's an actual, Doug Martin was my initial comp for him. Yeah. And I've seen that thrown around a lot that, he's got that Doug Martin, Maurice Jones-Drew kind of thing going on. But I mean, man, he just does so many things really, really well. You want a guy that had early production and volume in his career, that's Jonah Coleman. You want a guy that has a nose for the end zone and can score a bunch of touchdowns, that's Jonah Coleman. You want a guy that has a little bit of a receiving profile. He had 31 receptions in his best season, and then also in his best season had a 1.7 yards per route run as well. For a running back, that's pretty impressive. As I mentioned, he's got the beefy size. It's a 33.5 BMI, which is really, really fun number. He didn't test because he was not going to run very well. So I don't have any of the athleticism numbers, but man, I mean, when you're just talking about a player that I just really can feel like get inserted as a solid, workhorse plus type of running back, I think that's Jonah Coleman in this class. And draft capital is going to really determine where he ultimately grades out. Yep. My projected number for him, I've got him in the 3rd round based on mock draft ADP, which puts him at a 72 overall grade, which would be 2nd after draft capital adjustments in this class if that happens. Emmett Johnson would be really the only other one that could take him over, but they've got him plugged in as a round 4 pick for mock draft ADP. So the ADP game will vary between the two in terms of which one ultimately gets the potential RB2 nod in my marker system. But if he's a 2nd round pick, he's just so much better. He's closer to an 80 overall grade, which would actually be the 14th best running back since 2020, in the same range as like Henderson and Judkins, and better than Harvey and Caleb last year. That's if he's a 2nd rounder. If he's a 4th rounder, day 3 pick, he kind of gets thrown into some of the comps that my model gives him are like Ray Davis, Zach Moss, like those kind of players as a day 3 pick, which I still think would be a very interesting player to draft. You might get a Tyler Algier season out of him if he lands in the right opportunity year 1, or like a James Robinson season, Jordan Howard, that kind of player. Or he might just be like Kendre Miller 2.0 and not really get anything, which sucked. I like Kendre Miller. Tank Bigsby is another name as well. Those would be the kind of day 3 comps that he gets, which I still really like to draft that guy. It's just the confidence drops significantly.
I think his here's the thing. So the 3 main production metrics in the ZAP model: prorated reception share, best season adjusted yards per team play, best season adjusted yards per team pass attempt, 72nd percentile, 49th, and 88th percentile. Like, those are all pretty strong within this class. It's not very good. And then the advanced numbers that, we get from like a PFF, avoided tackles per attempt, 89th percentile, explosive run rate, 70th percentile, which is important because he didn't run. And I think he didn't run because he's not very fast. That's more than likely the reason. 89th percentile yards after contact per attempt. Like, it's a very interesting profile. I agree with you. Like, I think that, Coleman is someone who, can carry that workload, can be a do-it-all back, and a team might fall in love with that. I also think Emmett Johnson is potentially that kind of player. How do you view Emmett Johnson versus Jadarian Price right now?
Yeah, Emmett Johnson grades out, I'll say, significantly higher pre-draft, but then whenever the draft capital conversation gets thrown into there, that's going to really even things out, because it seems like, if you wanted a betting favorite for RB2 off the board, it's Jadarian Price. Potentially even I've seen him thrown as the 32nd pick to Seattle. That would be
crazy.
That would be something. But yeah, Emmett Johnson, I really like Emmett Johnson. I think he also kind of fits that mold as a potential do-it-all back. I don't know if he gets thrown into that role in the NFL because he is, 5'10", 200. So it's like he's kind of got that Chase Brown, Kyron Williams sort of thing going on. Blake Corum actually pops up as like a low-end comp for him as well. But I mean, when you talk about the production was at an all-time high last year at Nebraska. He's got the receiving. He's got pretty much everything that you want. The combine kind of sucked for him, but I thought that the combine was like okay for a player like Emmett Johnson. I just think that he's going to be a player that I'm targeting no matter what. If he's a day 2 pick, goes to a potential landing spot where he could be an immediate starter, I'm going to target him early in my rookie drafts, as like a very early second, maybe even like the 111, 112 in the ultimate landing spot place. But if he's a day 3 pick, he's going to be a guy that, lands onto my late round target list for running backs, which are, rounds 4 or 5 running backs who have a 200 or a 28 BMI, and have 7 or more of my markers hit. 7 out of the 12 running back markers hit. It's been a very, I would say the hit rate's kind of 50-50, but when you've got a 50-50 hit rate on day 3 running backs that you can just, plug in your rookie drafts and round 3 or round 4, like that's pretty significant. Like Chase Brown was on that list. Ramondre Stevenson was on that list. Aaron Jones was on that list. Mm-hmm. So there's some pretty good names out of there at the top end, and then just really good handcuffs that you want on your roster anyway. That's where Emmett Johnson lands. Now, when you compare him to Jadarian Price, the issue with Jadarian Price is he doesn't have any of the production metrics because he's behind Jeremiah Love. So it's like all projecting whether or not he can actually do it.
Does he hit on any of the production markers that you have?
Nope.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, it would almost be impossible. Like he has such an egregious production profile that to the point where I've also said to myself, it's so different than every other day 2 running back that has ever hit the ZAP model database that I'm almost like, what if he's just an outlier? And he's already an outlier, right? Because he's a day 2 pick with this bad production profile.
Right. I've seen people throw Roschon Johnson out as like, well, he could be Roschon again because Roschon didn't have any production behind Bijan. Right. But then Roschon fell to day 3 and it's kind of just, nixed everything that we thought his upside could have been. Whereas if Jadarian Price, if the NFL is telling us that he's, a top 50 overall player in this class, that's pretty significant, especially if he lands with Seattle or Minnesota or, one of these teams. Yeah, like that. I feel like I have to be in at that point. I get worried because we literally just had Caleb Johnson last year of like, maybe this guy shouldn't have been as drafted as highly as he was. My model really didn't like Caleb Johnson as well as I think a lot of other people. And I should have trusted it more.
Yeah.
But they had him as, where is he at? The running back 7 behind Bashal Tutin, actually. Yeah. So even though Bashal Tutin was a day 3 pick, Tutin graded out better than Caleb because of his production. And Caleb he didn't have any production, then had all of the production, in 2024.
Right.
It's not, I don't think he's similar to Jadarian Price in that regard, or Price is similar to Caleb in terms of, he might just be an absolute bust. But I am just worried because the NFL is vaulting him too high, if we vault him too high, and now all of a sudden we think that he's like an actually good or even very good prospect, and then he gets drafted over some other guys like KC or Omar Cooper or one of the tight ends or anything like that like are actually good prospects, and that might be bad process in rookie drafts.
So you're a Penn State guy, and we talked about this on your show. I'm on team Nick Singleton, but you're on team Kaytron Allen. Talk to me about why people should like Kaytron Allen more than Nick Singleton.
Yeah, I get it fully for the Nick Singleton. I mean, when you're talking about having a running back that's 6 foot, 220 pounds, he didn't test at the combine, but I can tell you he's a 4.3 type of player, right? From his film. Has the receiving production that he had the, early production that just kind of continued through his 4 years at Penn State. He was a 5-star recruit. I thought we were getting the next Saquon Barkley, but just time and time again, over the course of his career, it was just ended up being more and more Kaytron Allen. Kaytron was the guy that would, spark drives when the offense wasn't doing well, that he would get that chunk play to get something going. He would, move the chains when we needed to move the chains the most, that, he would find the end zone inside of the 10 or inside of the 5 that Nick Singleton didn't do. And it's just, I understand from a fantasy standpoint that the upside is there with Nick Singleton for the bigger body back with the receiving profile that he has. It's going to be way easier for him to find fantasy relevance than Kaytron Allen. But I think Kaytron might just be like the better running back. Yeah. And he might have an easier translation into the NFL that gives him an earlier opportunity to produce. It's probably not going to be tremendous production. It might not even last all that long. But I think that if you're betting on one of these two guys to kind of be more productive for you earlier into their NFL careers, my bet would actually be on Kaytron Allen based on his body of work at Penn State than Nick Singleton. Whereas I think Singleton obviously has the upside ceiling case and could be a longer, producer than Kaytron just because of the type of player that he is.
That's kind of how I view Singleton is like, I think he's really volatile, really high variance because of the comps that I see in the model with him. And because, it's like, he just didn't give us his advanced numbers are pretty bad too. Like they're just not super, super strong. But when you match the size, the receiving, numbers and skill set and the probable speed, and speed score, you're like, man, there is this is a class that lacks, like we talked about Jonah Coleman and Emmett Johnson. And to me, those are the two guys that like check the most boxes that are like safest as production getters, in like the more traditional sense that we get from running backs. But that's it in this class. And so I'm like, I'm just going to throw that dart at Nick Singleton and just go for that upside because there's just not that much of that in this class right now. Not much going for him.
He's really like, outside of Jeremiah Love, like Nick Singleton might be one of, if not the second best athlete at the running back position in this class. Right. And especially when you've got the receiving production that he had, like I 100% get it. Most people are probably going to put Singleton ahead of Kaytron. I might even still have Singleton ahead of Kaytron if draft capital tells me, like if Singleton finds his way into the late day 2 and Kaytron's like a 5th round pick, well, that's going to be a little bit rough. But if they're very similar, then I find myself leaning towards Kaytron Allen, unless the landing spots are just that egregious.
Are there any other running backs that we haven't talked about that excite you, or are we just like this class is terrible?
This class kind of sucks. I mean, I have interest in Adam Randall, the converted wide receiver out of Clemson. He's pretty interesting. I don't mind Roman Hemby as he's the Indiana running back. I know a lot of people kind of went more towards Kalen Black, but I'm kind of team Roman Hemby out of that backfield. Damon Claiborne is kind of interesting as like this riser. He has pretty solid production over the course of his career. He might be a potential like late day 2 type of player from some of the news that I've seen coming out of, you know, the smoke around Claiborne and stuff like that. So he's interesting, I'll say the least to him. In the same way that like Dazon Stribling is interesting to me at the wide receiver position. Yeah. We talked about Terrion Stewart on my show. The dude's just like, it's so wild that he's just like an absolute bowling ball, kind of similar to Jonah Coleman. And then he has like the second highest missed tackles forced rate in my database behind only Antonio Gibson, ahead of Genty, ahead of Bijan Robinson, ahead of Javonte Williams. Like, I just can't comprehend how a human being does that at his size. So Terrion Stewart, I think, is a really fun, like 7th round pick in the NFL draft. I don't even know if he'll be drafted, but he's fun. Yeah. And then I've never mentioned this name before in DLF, so I'm kind of scared to do it here, but I want to do it before the NFL draft just to be like, throw it out I said his name. What happened to Jaden Ott? This dude had all of the production in the world and then like goes to Oklahoma and he just like disappears. I'm like, what is going, like my marketer system likes the early production and the receiving profile that he had. And then it's just like, he just disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't even know if he's going to get drafted either, but he's an interesting name. Yeah, I'll say.
I just added him because he wasn't a combine invite, right? And I only look at combine invites for the prospect guide and stuff. I just added him this week, and I was messaging the late round Discord saying that I added Kalen Black and Jaden Ott because those two seem like the most likely who weren't invited to the combine to get drafted. And if they don't get drafted, they're deleted from the Zap model database because I want to keep things clean and consistent. But regardless, Ott graded out a lot better than Kalen Black did. Kalen Black is 24 and a half years old, first off. Like that's a flag. That's a problem. Jaden Ott's still 23, but he's not as old as Kalen Black is. He's got less size than him, but better receiving profile, which obviously goes a long way within the Zap model. So he looked better. The one thing that I found too is I was going through and updating all the pro day 40s. And when I, cause speed score is an input in the Zap model at running back and speed score, I'm trying to get the speed scores inputted. It's not a huge factor, but it's a factor. I'm trying to get all the speed scores updated for, the draft happening and getting the post draft prospect guide out. And I'm putting them in and I adjust by 0.05 for pro day, which a lot of people do. You add that because you'll get some home cooking. Like Emmett Johnson, for instance, ran a 4.56 at the combine, I think it was. And then or 4.55, maybe it was something along those lines, but regardless, something like that. 4.56, 5.6. And he ran at his pro day, he ran a 4.49 and which is great, but we shouldn't take that at face value. And it kind of aligns with that 4.56 that we saw at the combine. So, but anyway, I was going through all of them, dude. Some of these 40 times, it's some of the most egregious athleticism testing that I've seen from a draft class ever. Like I'm talking Des Reed. I didn't realize this. Desmond Reed at his pro day ran a 4.55. It looks like at 174 pounds. So his smaller than us. His speed score is 77 right now when adjusted for pro day. There's a speed score of 88 from Le'Veon Moss that I have within the model. There's a speed score of 83 for Jamari Taylor. Like there's just these guys ran so slow at their pro days and it's kind of frightening. Like some of these guys, even like Jamari Taylor, I'm like, I can squint and see it and make a case. Like I can, but now I'm like this is the equivalent of a 4.68 is what he ran. And some places I could have maybe put that at a 4.70. But because there were multiple sources saying different things for pro day time, I just gave him the benefit of the doubt because it didn't matter. He still had an 83 speed score. We're just seeing that everywhere in this class. I'm like, it's so night and day from what we had last year. Yeah. It's this class really does kind of suck. Yeah. It's just not that great. Yeah. And it sucks too, because from my like dynasty rookie draft, strategy has always just been like 3rd and 4th rounds are primarily rookie running backs because I think that they're the easiest that you can translate. You kind of
know if you have something or not very early on. And you can either cut bait or you can keep them if they still look like a solid handcuff, or better. And this year it's just kind of like, man, some of these wide receivers kind of interest me a little bit more. I really find myself gravitating towards like Cade Klubnik as a potential upside shot at the quarterback position.
Right.
There's, we're going to talk about the tight ends here soon, but like this tight end class isn't half bad.
It's fun. Yeah.
That there are really some fun names that you could draft in that later rounds of rookie drafts. And it sucks, is I'm like, give me all these running backs. I want all these guys. And there's just nobody.
Yeah.
Even if like Emmett Johnson's like a 4th round pick or something like that, he's going to be a 2nd round pick in rookie drafts.
Easy. Yeah.
Katron and Singleton might even be too.
I think Emmett Johnson right now pre-draft, I have him at like 112 in single quarterback just because it's just like you can't, I can't get like to some of the wide receivers where I'm like questionable what their draft capital is going to be. So I'm just like, yeah, I'll throw out the guy who I think is the RB2 right now. And then if draft capital changes, we can adjust. But yeah, it just goes to show that, the top half of this class is pretty strong. And then there's a pretty legit drop overall. I'm talking about, at all positions. There's a pretty real drop that you're going to hit. You talked about tight end. Let's just get to this really briefly. Eli Stowers versus Kenyon Sadiq. Do you think that Eli Stowers is actually a better prospect than Sadiq?
From a fantasy football standpoint, I do. This is where, we're always talking from a fantasy football standpoint, but whenever I put out a tweet that says that I don't understand why Eli Stowers isn't the consensus tight end 1, all of these NFL people start coming at me, and then they're like, oh, never mind. This is a fantasy football. This is why fantasy football people shouldn't get involved in our draft analysis and stuff like that. So like, I think Sadiq is a better prospect from an NFL standpoint. He's a better blocker, but if you're talking about fantasy production and the ability to be essentially a wide receiver playing tight end, that's Eli Stowers to me. I mean, like he's going to grade out, in the 70s, maybe even he might scratch the 80s if he's actually a 1st round pick. But everything is there, man. I mean, like he's going to, I named the list the Brock Bowers list. I kind of do this with some of the top players that really fit these lists. So I called it the Bowers list. He is going to be in my marker system one of, I think, 3 players that have 10 or more regular markers hit, and then all 10 of my advanced markers hit for the tight end position. Wow. And it is literally him and Brock Bowers, and then Isaiah Likely. So, well, the Isaiah Likely hive is out there for sure. They're like, yes, I knew it. He's phenomenal. But yeah, and so like you could look at just 10 or more markers hit. Like that's a pretty significant list that has like Gronk and Kelsey, and I think Trey McBride is on that list, and Brock Bowers and Warren and Loveland. Like that's a pretty phenomenal list. There's misses for sure, as there should be with most of these things, but the list is pretty tremendous. You look at 7 or more advanced markers, which I found to be kind of the threshold for tight ends for pretty quality success. That list is great. And Stowers is on both of those. Like that's a pretty rare thing to happen. He's got everything that you could possibly want outside of the one red flag is like, can he actually develop into a blocker to be more of a full-time tight end? I've seen people comp him to Dalton Kincaid, that, he lives in this 50 to 60% snap count range because he's not a blocker, and that might hurt his ceiling of production in the NFL. But I think that if you're a team that is drafting Eli Stowers, I ideally hope that you have a plan for him to be more of your slot wide receiver and to kind of be like what Colston Loveland was last year for the Bears, or, TJ Hawkinson, Evan Ingram, like the highlights that we've seen from their careers. That's Eli Stowers to me. I think that there's a case for him to be a top 8 pick in rookie drafts as a tight end 1 over Sadiq.
Yeah, it's really difficult for me. The one part that I have found to be interesting from a narrative standpoint within the fantasy space is how people seem to be kind of crapping on Kenyon Sadiq's production profile the way they are, which I get to a degree. But, like if you were to look at yards per route run, for instance, he's at a disadvantage. It's the Casey Concepcion problem. He's at a disadvantage because he's not playing as long as most other tight ends. Like Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, they had that extra year. If you look at those 2 tight ends in particular, they had comparable. Kenyon Sadiq has a better career yards per route run rate in his career through 3 years, obviously through his career, but than Trey McBride had through 3 years. It's that Trey McBride then played another year and he was able to boost that number up more. And maybe that gives more comfort, from an evaluation standpoint and a prospecting standpoint. I get all that, but I'm having a hard time. Like, do you see Kenyon Sadiq as having like a bad analytical profile? Because I look at his like breakout score, which is based on receiving yards per team pass attempt and adjust for program strength and for age. It's like 74th, 75th percentile. Like it's certainly not bad. I just think that like Stowers has just a better production profile. And then whenever you layer in projected draft capital, the model likes Sadiq more. But like, I will say that Stowers has a better production profile and age adjusted, even though he's a couple years older than him, like it looks better, right? But it's hard for me to say that Sadiq has a bad production profile.
Yeah, I think also whenever you consider the fact that, the tight end can kind of be a onesie position for the NFL. And so it's not like you have multiple out there all the time, like wide receivers, to where you're competing. You're at wide receiver. It's easy to get the snaps and then you're just competing for targets. But for a tight end, sometimes you're competing for snaps to then compete for targets.
Yeah.
And so Sadiq was behind Terrence Ferguson, who was a 2nd round pick last year. And also had Tez Johnson and a few other wide receivers to then compete with for when he did get on the field, prior to 2025. So you could argue some of that away with a little bit of competition. The production profile, like he doesn't hit on a lot of what I'm looking for, but he's also not that far off as well.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that he's pretty good. His advanced numbers look really well as too. Like I mentioned that, 7 of the 10 advanced markers for tight ends kind of seems like the baseline for me. He hits on 7, so he's right in there. Obviously the draft capital is going to be pretty significant for him as well. He's got the blocking ability. My fear is that I think we've kind of cooled maybe a little bit on it, but like I think the Dynasty community really double counted his combine.
Yeah.
Because like imagine watching Kenyon Sadiq film and then saying, yeah, this guy's like not going to break every combine test that he's going to do. Like, I mean, I didn't expect him to run a sub 4.4,
of course,
but we shouldn't double count that stuff. And honestly, some of that is a little scary because some of his closest comps in my marker system are like Noah Fant, OJ Howard, Ben Sinnott, Terrence Ferguson popped up a little bit as well. So like some of the stuff that we have seen from previous college tight ends that don't have the greatest production profile, but they have all of the athleticism in the world, is that athleticism doesn't translate as well whenever every other player on the field is nearly as athletic.
Right.
So I think it's one of those things where like you hear that tight end athleticism is just so important. And I think that that's true. It's more important than the other positions, but to say then that it is more important or that production doesn't matter as much for tight end, I take issue with that because I do think that college production matters.
Agreed.
And Kenyon Sadiq doesn't hit on a lot of stuff, even though he hits on, a decent, he's fine. I think he's a fine production profile.
Yeah.
And he has got the athleticism. I just don't think that he's as good as Eli Stowers from a fantasy football perspective. I think if someone likes Stowers more than Sadiq, I'm not going to fight it because I think they're like the model won't more than likely have Stowers ahead of Sadiq. But I mean, you look at the individual metrics that we're analyzing, and it's easy to see how you could go in that direction. My thing is more so like I feel like if it's almost like if Stowers wasn't in this draft class, people would love Kenyon Sadiq, right? But but because Stowers is in the class, there's this like natural clickbaity, like, oh, Stowers is good and Sadiq is bad, or like, I don't need, this isn't the profile that I want to target. But if Stowers wasn't there, Sadiq would be easy the tight end 1 in this class, there wouldn't really be that conversation. Are there any other tight ends out there that you're interested in? I like Max Clare. He's my tight end 3. I think he's just a very solid tight end player. I kind of start gravitating towards him in the mid to late 2nd round of rookie drafts over some of those weird day 2 wide receivers we were talking about. Tanner Koziel is my favorite late round tight end player. He hits on a lot of production, just hits on my baselines for athleticism. Like I'm talking like I'm looking for a 4.7 or better 40. He ran a 4.7. I'm looking for a 100 speed score. He's at like 101.
Yeah.
Like that, like he like just hits that athleticism stuff. But the production was pretty great, at back-to-back years at multiple schools the past 2 years. And I think that he could be, he's a name that I haven't even seen mentioned as like a potential even top 5 guy for people.
He's
in
great
this
production
class.
profile. Great production.
But yeah, the production profile is all there. And if he turns into Jake Ferguson or Dalton Schultz as a 3rd or 4th round rookie pick, like
all day,
that's a W.
Yeah.
The last name I want to throw out there is Daquan Wright out of Ole Miss.
Yeah.
Like, you want to talk about another guy that is uber athletic, kind of plays this F position as like more of a slot than a blocker. The production profile is kind of, iffy, but I find myself, he does really well in the advanced stuff as well. He also hits on 7 advanced markers, so he's get thrown into that kind of list. We'll see where draft capital ultimately lands up for him. But I think he's an interesting, like you mentioned, Jeff Caldwell as like an arbitrage play for the wide receiver position. And I think that Daquan Wright is a free arbitrage play because he's not even going to get drafted in your rookie drafts. He's just, I think, a name to monitor this weekend for the NFL draft.
Yeah.
See if he gets drafted at all. And if he does, maybe he's a guy that you pick up and just kind of stash instead of, having an open roster spot or rostering your wide receiver 10 or something like that.
Yeah, I believe so. Brandon Gadula was the one who did all the tight end profiles in the prospect guide, and he mentioned one of the lines in the guide says, from a fantasy football standpoint, he, which is right, could be one of the bigger overperformers among this year's tight end class in the right situation. So he is right lockstep with you on that one. All right, you've given me a lot of time. One more question before I let you go. Give me a bold take about this year's draft that'll probably be wrong in, 8 hours by the time people are listening to this.
Yep. This is really going to get tested tonight, Thursday night in round 1. I do think that the big 3 wide receivers, I think all of them go top 10. And there's a multitude of landing spots for that to happen, where all 3, like you've got the Giants twice, you've got the Browns, the Commanders, the Saints, the Chiefs. Nobody talks about how the Titans have a need at wide receiver, but they absolutely have a need at wide receiver that maybe if they trade back, that could be very interesting if Jeremiah Love's unavailable for them. So I think that all 3 of them go top 10, Lemon, Tyson, Tate.
I dig it.
I also think, I think there's the other 3 wide receivers go in the first round, KC, Boston, and Cooper. And then I think that this 2026 class sets the NFL record for the most wide receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds, a record that was set in 2020 with 13. 2022 tied it, but I think that we can do it this year with 14 of them. There's enough of these interesting names that you and I maybe just don't really like.
Agreed.
But we can, you can see how an NFL team's going to like this guy in this role, and I think that we get a decent number of wide receivers Thursday and Friday night early on.
Yeah, I like that call. I mean, I really think it's possible. The way that the mock draft stuff is looking and the data that I'm looking at, like I did this on the show last week, the late round show, where I looked at projected since 2016, projected day 1 and day 2 wide receivers versus actual. And NFL mock draft database has been relatively on point. They're like minus 0.4 on average difference between projected and actual. And right now it's projected to have the tied for the most day 1 and day 2 picks since 2016. So like it's very possible that we get a lot of those happening, into round 2. So that definitely is a very logical and quantitative approach that you took there with that bold take. But man, this was great. I really appreciate the time. Really appreciate the analysis. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that great stuff.
Yeah, it's basically all my work is on the DLF YouTube channel. I'm at AmazeHaze _ on X and Blue Sky. I did just post the link to my marker system tool, which is just themarkersystem.com. So you can go and check that out. All of the grades on there right now for 2026 are, projected ADP based on mock draft ADP. That will get updated, of course, after the weekend, but you can go in and see final grades for any player in any class since 2010, as well as a kind of objective lens view of the Dynasty rankings for this class based on those final grades. A class breakdown that's going to tell you that 2026 is the worst class since 2010 at least, and a bunch of other really cool things. I've gotten some really good feedback on it, which I'm very appreciative of. So those are those are the plugs.
Yeah, no, it's awesome stuff. You guys won't hear from me until Tuesday next week because the draft is happening Thursday. This is when this releases. I will be working on that prospect guide Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Make sure you buy the prospect guide now because you can get the pre-draft version of it. And then when the post-draft version comes, so you save that down, you download it, and then the post-draft version comes late on Saturday after the NFL draft is over, and you can save that down too, and you can have both versions. So if you do purchase the pre-draft version of the guide, you will get the post-draft version emailed to your inbox just hours after the NFL draft is over. So enjoy that. Enjoy the NFL draft. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
The 2026 NFL Draft is here, and the NFL Daily Podcast has it covered from all angles. Join me, Greg Rosenthal, and Jordan Rodriguez after night 1 on Thursday. Nick Shook joins me night 2 Friday, and then Sunday to recap everything that went down over the 3 days in Pittsburgh. We'll tell you who won the draft and which players were my favorite picks.
Listen to NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal on the free iHeartRadio app. Open the app, search NFL Daily, and listen now.
I'm Daniel Jeremiah.
And I am Greg Rosenthal.
I know that, Greg. We're teaming up on 40s and Free Agents, the podcast that owns the NFL offseason.
This is where teams are built. Free agency, the combine, pro days, trades. Every move matters.
From my draft boards and mock drafts
to my vaunted top 101 free agents and how rosters come together.
Quarterback movement,
surprise signings.
We'll tell you what it means and who really wins. Open your free iHeartRadio app, search 40s and Free Agents, and listen now.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.